Hello everyone, yes, my hair looks a bit kind of wet and like it's been very recently gelled, and that's because that's what my hair looks like in the morning because I put the gel in it while it's still wet, as I've explained before, and then I give it a moment to dry so that I can then ruffle it up later on and kind of give it a more natural look, because my hair, without any sort of product in it, just falls completely flat. It's quite crazy just how kind of fine and otherwise entirely formless my hair is, which is one reason why I grew my hair long, because I can't have my hair be short without doing something with it. It just looks so weird, just the fact it's completely flat and there's just nothing. It's like the most boring, inoffensive hair, which is why when I have it short I put stuff in it. Anyway, all that aside, I'm actually not going to have any preamble here at all, pretty much, because this video is quite long and you guys voted for it. You guys voted for me responding to somebody responding to me. The video is 2 hours. That means even if I sat here and said nothing, it would still take 2 parts. I do not want to be spending a huge amount of time on this video just because, I'm now, and thank you for this, I'm getting a whole load of recommendations and nominations for videos people would like me to respond to. So, seeing as I've got all those videos you guys are recommending, I'd kind of, like to actually be able to make my way through them. So I don't want to be on this for too long. I think what I'm going to do is play it at slightly faster than regular speed. We'll see. We'll just jump into it now, because obviously the one thing I want to do if we're going to make progress is actually start watching it. So let's go.
A lot of biases that cloud his ability to sort of reflect some of these epistemic practices back on his own beliefs and be challenged and things like that too.
Okay, I'm actually just going to pause here. Again, I was kind of fiddling around the volume a little bit there. Basically, he was criticizing Peter Boghossian for street epistemology. I will say this. I think the street epistemology thing, it's very cringe. You have to understand, most people are stupid. So giving anybody a tool that allows them to label something they're doing as smart is very risky when there's a very good chance that they're actually not going to be very good at doing it in a way that is smart. I don't know if that makes sense, but essentially, I remember one time I was speaking to someone, it was on a Facebook group, and they were talking about street epistemology and something like that, and I was like, feel free to because I think they were saying they wanted to practice it. I think that like my memory is they were saying like, oh, does anyone we'll have like a Facebook chat, and I'll practice my street epistemology. So I held to my position. My position was that God existed, and it was really funny because they were very clearly not able to do street epistemology properly, in that they did think, and it's this thing that a lot of people do. It's a very embarrassing thing, which is people who, they make an argument and then it's almost like they can't accept that the argument hasn't worked. Obviously, that's a stupid thing to do in general. Like, if you make an argument and then the person's like, well, no, that argument, like, that doesn't work, it doesn't convince me, here's why it doesn't convince me, and like, no, but really the argument must convince you, right? Because it's a very good argument, so surely you have to accept it. But it's especially embarrassing in the case of street epistemology, because the point of street epistemology is supposed to be to kind of intelligently interrogate what the other person believes in a way that leads them to essentially possibly reevaluate their beliefs. Like, that's supposed to be the point of street epistemology. You basically encourage someone to have a dialogue with themselves by just asking them the obvious questions that extend from the claims that they're making. That's supposed to be the point of street epistemology. Obviously, therefore, somebody who's going into it with a lot of ego and an attitude of, deep down, I must be right, and I'm really not willing to admit that other people could be correct about things, is obviously not going to have a good time, because they're going to want to impose that on what should be a discussion someone's pretty much having with themselves. I don't know, I can imagine Peter Boghossian, despite him being one of the people who kind of popularized street epistemology, I can imagine him having like that kind of a bad mindset himself. But yeah, let's jump in, or let's continue.
What is meant by wokeness is this very...
I just realized I can literally just speed up the bits while I'm talking. Like, suddenly I just realized that. Like, obviously, because this guy, this is a live thing, presumably he's going to be watching my video in full. So I'm like trying to make up time now by speeding through his preamble, where there were some things that I was like, oh, maybe I could respond to that. Like at one point he said that Peter Boghossian, like one of his criticisms was that he has spoken to loads of gender critical people, but he hasn't spoken to many trans activists. That is potentially a fair criticism to make of him. It's just funny to not acknowledge that for the most part, the trans activist position gets way more exposure than the gender critical position. So even if this guy, Peter Boghossian, puts more focus on the gender critical side, obviously, when you look at the mainstream media and stuff like that, most people couldn't even tell you what the gender critical position is, whereas lots of people are aware of all the claims around like non-binary and trans women or women. So that was an example of the time where I was like, oh, I could respond to that, but I was like, oh, I was playing at like 2 times speed when he said that. And, you know, I know it would probably be annoying for you guys if I included that clip. But yeah, going forward, I think actually whenever he's talking, I'll play it at normal speed. So if I include it, you know, you guys, presumably you might be watching this video at double speed, you know, you probably wouldn't be able to even tell what he was saying at like what would effectively be 4 times speed for you. So anything he's saying, I'll play at normal speed and I'll just speed through the things that I was saying. Because of course, I've already said those things, so you don't need to hear them again.
I actually have separate accounts, and it got recommended to me on my computing channel. So if you look at like my computing channel, right?
I'm just such an IT nerd.
My main channel is kind of cursed because of the stuff that I review often.
To be honest, I've never, like, I know people do that, like they set up burner accounts in order to, is burner, I guess it's the right term, in order to, like, if they're watching a particular type of thing that they wouldn't usually like, so that they don't destroy their recommendations. I've never bothered to do that. My recommendations are very weird. For me, it often seems to get stuck on one particular type of thing, and then if I move off from that thing, it then doesn't recommend that thing again. For example, if I watch, let's say, one of those sort of just ambient, kind of relaxing, chill, you know, like background music things, which I do watch sometimes if I'm, you know, getting ready for bed. Sometimes I like to listen to some ambient, relaxing music. And then, like, I'll get recommended just a complete screen of, like, the next day, oh, here's all this, like, relaxing, chill, ambient music. And it's like, well, come on, like, be realistic. But then, obviously, if I then don't click any of that stuff because, well, maybe I'm not in the mood, the next, like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, you know, I want to listen to some ambient music again. I'll go onto my home, and I'm sure because I listen to it reasonably regularly, there'll be something if I just scroll through the homepage that's recommended. Nothing. And that's like something I find so often. It'll be like either I'm getting recommended loads and loads of stuff about it, or I'll be getting recommended nothing about it, even though it's something that I do quite regularly go back to. I feel like YouTube just needs to understand the fact that people watch different things at different times, and you should probably just continue to recommend a variety of things. You know, maybe sometimes I'm in the mood for a funny video, maybe sometimes I'm in the mood for like a cooking video, you know, like so many things, but I often just get one type and it annoys me. Weirdly, I don't get recommended that much trans stuff, even though I watch plenty of it.
Are actually invested in kind of trying to robustly think through some of these ideas and offer rebuttals.
Oh, he's being very complimentary. He's like, oh, you know, this guy, he seems really intelligent. Well, thank you.
It seems to be this person's main kind of focus as a YouTuber is to respond to this kind of stuff. So let's see. Whoa.
Yeah. This was back when I was in America while we were waiting for my wife's visa to process. So
why am I reacting to this? Just because, I mean, I sort of said before, so maybe you've just joined, but it's because I thought that this was sort of,
What I found interesting, just on sort of why is he reacting to this, I am wondering, like, how much of this is he actually going to have to respond to? Because this is not, like, I said, like, oh, I'm a bit embarrassed. And, you know, one of the reasons you might think that is because, or, well, one reason that is kind of true, so whether you think this or not, it is kind of true. I always do get a bit on edge, even though I think I have really good arguments for my position. I do get a bit, like, tense when I think, what if I have made a big mistake? Like, that's the thing I always think, like, wouldn't it be embarrassing if I'm about to sit here and just watch myself make a huge mistake and this guy's going to point out what a stupid mistake it was? So, like, that's one of the other reasons. But the thing is, in this case, that doesn't really apply because I can't actually imagine how much this guy could actually have to disagree with, because I think most of the points I make in the video are pretty uncontroversial and basically just summarizing other people's stuff. So yeah, we'll see. It might be the case that this doesn't take that long, because yeah, like I say, for as long as he's just playing me, I'm going to be playing it in double speed, and it seems like he'll be playing me in double speed or rather it seems like a lot of it will just be him watching me, because yeah, what else is there to respond to?
Male and female, and man and woman, and then
my camera's not good enough to unfocus me. I mean, it will unfocus me, but not because something else is in focus, just because it's shit.
Everything quite rapidly.
Oh, I think he's talking about. So this is something which happens, which I Sometimes I think I should get good at camera stuff. He made a comment there, and I was like trying to work out what it was he was saying, so I went back and played it a few times. He's talking about the fact that I'm out of focus and my microphone is in focus. For me, I like having my microphone in frame because I feel like surely the audio sounds better than it would if it was a significant distance away. Like, I just can't imagine my microphone. I was told, like, having it about the length of your forearm. It could be a little bit further away based on that. But, yeah, having it about the length of your forearm away is pretty good. But, yeah, I mean, for me, I would just think, surely if it was that far away, it would sound echoey and weird. But the one thing is, it does sometimes mean that the camera focuses on my microphone or focuses on something else other than my face. And I do have that happen. One of the issues is it's not super easy to tell on this tiny screen whether or not it's happening. So it's only when I'm going back and editing a video that I'm like, well, shit, my face is out of focus there.
What words mean. I think that whole conversation is a red herring that basically involves a lot of post hoc rationalization justification for various.
Sorry, actually, I was getting ready to press pause, and I pressed pause prematurely. What he's saying there, of course, is that he doesn't think this is a debate actually about definitions. I would like to hear his justification for that, because I think this is usually quite intensely a debate about definitions.
Some particular criterion of what the word woman means, right? And it's just an entailment of that they have to exclude trans people from bathrooms or something. I think the kind of belief causal story goes the other way around, where someone has some values or something and they feel sort of icky about maybe an alternative lifestyle.
See, this is interesting. This guy obviously is willing to like listen to me and engage with like some, like he's been complimentary of me. See, the video is responding to is 59 minutes long, so he must spend no more than an hour responding to things I say. Like, this is interesting because this is something I've said so much is not the case many times, that it's not that people start with a predisposition to dislike or otherwise disagree with like being trans, and then the arguments come after as a post hoc justification. That's something that I've often said, like I've really wanted to stress, is not the case. So it's kind of interesting to hear him just say, well, he thinks that is the case. The issue that runs into, you'd think, is he must be aware. Well, I don't know, because obviously like Peter Boghossian, I guess, is kind of a bit more like right wing, but he must be aware that there are plenty of people who originally came at this from the perspective of being pro-trans, but then they hit peak trans and realized it doesn't really make any sense. You'd think he'd be aware of that, so I don't know.
We're going to either sort of assume that there's something wrong with that and have a kind of negatively valenced emotional value judgment against someone performing that behavior. I mean,
look, okay, I'm going to pause here and say, because he was talking for a little while and I thought I should say something. And it is kind of related to what he's saying there. I have said before, and interestingly, a video I did shortly after or shortly before this video he's responding to was my video on trans identity as it relates to mental health. And one of the big things there was getting into a lot of underlying ethics around what mental health means and what way we should treat mental health as in kind of an axiomatic sense. So that is something that I've wanted to return back to on several, because I think there's several areas like that where actually it is worth understanding trans identity in terms of looking at some presuppositions people might have about how the world should be. So obviously one of the things I'm saying in my mental health video is that we shouldn't completely medicalize mental health issues. On some level, it does have to be treated as something that can be solved with lifestyle changes and things like that. And again, if you haven't seen my video on trans identity as it relates to mental health, or you haven't seen it in a while, I'd recommend watching that, because yeah, that gets across what I'm saying. Basically, that is a presupposition about fundamentally how we should deal with mental health on a wider societal level, which then, in understanding that probably does help to understand where I'm coming from specifically on the trans issue. So he's kind of right in saying there are wider beliefs about how society should be that are related to values that do inform what somebody is then likely to believe about trans identity and other similar issues, I suppose.
Affirming people in these identities, enabling them to, dress in one particular social role or to even medically transitioned is sort of something that's perfectly okay. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, okay, so I think the issue of this, so basically saying like the disagreement is whether people think this action is okay. The problem is, in terms of like the material reality of transness, that can exist independent of somebody's opinion on trans identity. So I guess what he'd have to therefore be saying, and I suppose he kind of did say this, is the disagreement isn't about trans identity itself, but I guess the problem is it like that fails to account for people like me who are entirely against trans identity, but have absolutely no problem with gender nonconformity, except for the tiniest kind of way in which I analogize it to cultural appropriation, where I basically say there are differing levels of societal power, and as such, taking a certain look that's associated with a culture or subculture and wearing it as a uniform, as a costume, when you don't have any of the kind of sociological wider experience there, I think that can be criticized. But even on the issue of medical transition, I've said before, I'm fine with transsexuality existing. And even if I wasn't fine with transsexuality existing, it would be to do with completely different questions than specifically about trans identity itself. So, for example, the fact that I, think that there should be quite a high age of consent for any kind of treatment that would render somebody infertile. That's not, if transsexuality didn't render somebody infertile, well, I wouldn't think there should be a high age of consent for it. So even though someone might be like, well, clearly you have a massive problem with transsexuality because you think that someone needs to be 25 before they can really undergo it. No, I just think I have a massive problem with people becoming infertile when I think that that's something that you'd be deciding at a very young age. Point being, clearly, in that case, there's quite a disconnect between my broad enthusiasm for gender nonconformity, my indifference really towards transsexuality, and then my absolute refusal to go along with trans identity. It doesn't really line up with what this guy's saying, that it's not really about identity at all, it's actually about these things. Well, if those two things are kind of conflated, as he's suggesting, why do I have different opinions on the two of them?
I don't think that it's a misunderstanding about what words mean here or something. Instead, there are more first order political disagreements about whether we should, in fact,
Okay, so here, again, interestingly, considering, again, the fact this video is only 2 hours, so it's only twice as long as my video, and my video is like an hour, and he's watching my video in full, he spent quite a while talking about this thing, which, again, I don't want to, I realize it would be incredibly hypocritical for me to be like, oh, this guy spent quite a while talking about this thing. I'm not saying it would be a bad thing if he spent a while talking about this thing. Because I'm assuming you guys watch my stuff on 2x speed, I therefore can't really watch most of this on 2x speed, like the stuff where he's talking. So I'm just a bit more aware of how long it's taken because I'm watching it at half the speed I would usually watch a video like this at. But yeah, basically, so his claim is that this whole identity thing doesn't matter. It does for several reasons. First of all, he's saying oh, well, what really matters is how you want to treat them. But, well, the way that you treat them could depend, for example, things like going into women's bathrooms. Well, that's only appropriate if they are women, surely. But the other thing I'd say is that this does matter in that saying a bigoted statement is a problem. And saying that a woman is somebody who, wears pink dresses and basically performs femininity, that's sexist because it's relating womanhood to, a traditional idea of femininity. And that alone is enough reason to make a big issue of this. So even if the only thing that we've got to deal with here is the fact that saying trans women are women necessarily means saying that womanhood is defined in this simplistic, reductive way that relates it to sociology rather than biology, that's enough of a reason, because if it's about sociology, then you're saying there is some social role to being a woman, or some kind of performance that makes somebody a woman, and that's just, I think, really sexist, because no, somebody who isn't interested in that social role or that performance at all can still be a woman because of their biological sex. So yeah, I do think this matters, actually, in the exact same way it would matter if if somebody had an incredibly reductive, offensive idea of race that related certain racial categories to racial stereotypes. Of course, that would be offensive and worth objecting to in and of itself.
If you don't have a sort of handy 3-word definition to hand, well, then you've lost the debate, right? If you can't.
Okay. So this is actually a really important thing. I have said before that I think that the way that the gender critical movement has given, I think, the false impression that the point of having a definition for the word woman is that it be incredibly simple. I think that is a problem. I think it's a problem because it then means that all somebody needs to do in order to feel like they've refuted that point is to point out that actually the definition adult human female is not entirely simple. Because even while who's a female most of the time is obvious, it's not always obvious, and it's not exactly simple to say what a woman is. Because even like, so somebody, or sorry, what a female is. So if somebody asked me what a female is, I'd give the same definition I give all the time, which is, the phenotype organized around facilitating the function of the large gamete in sexual reproduction. That's my go-to definition. Of course, you notice even that in itself isn't simple in terms of saying it. And then also there's a question of, well, what exactly does that mean? So you're already 3 levels. I think you could be 3 levels of interrogation removed from the original definition, and it's still reasonable to be asking, well, what exactly are you saying? Certainly if someone says, a woman is an adult human female, it's reasonable for somebody to say, well, what exactly is a female? And then even if you give a kind of rough, basic definition of a female, it would then be reasonable for somebody to interrogate that a bit further. So to say that the benefit, there's a word I'm looking for here that I'm struggling to get, and I'm going to get it because I'm committed to it. To say that a big strength of the gender critical definition is that it's very short and very simple, I think that's absolutely misguided because, people can interrogate that aspect of it. And even human and adult, of course, can be interrogated again with the adult thing. I'm not being a pedo. I'm just pointing out that exactly when we would consider, like I've pointed out before, I remember the first time somebody called me a man. I was about 15. What does that really mean? Who's to say? Does that mean that I was a man then? Or was I only a man, when I reached my 18th birthday, my 21st, my 16th? And even then, does that really make sense to take this kind of construct of age? Again, no, I understand why we have that construct. And for moral reasons, it's very important when it comes to things like the age of consent. And I absolutely support having the construct of age and validating the construct of age through our legal system. Of course, I know I shouldn't need to say this stuff. I hope you guys are with me on this. But in terms of literal, real truth, does something is in reality constructed as the number of times that we've spun around the earth, does that actually determine the exact point we become a man or a woman? Who's to say? So there are lots of ways that you can dispute these simple definitions, which is why what I've always said is not what matters is not so much that you have a simple definition, but simply that you have a definition where people can understand what you're saying. And that is, for me, what's really key. So I don't care if somebody is confused by my definition or needs to clarify things about my definition, because I don't think that a strength of my definition of a woman is that it's simple, is that, everyone immediately understands what it is. I think a strength is that people can understand what it is I mean. They can get a rough idea of what I mean, and we can work from that. So basically, long story short there, is that I actually agree with this guy that there are some gender critical people and kind of anti-woke types who act as if the big strength of the gender critical definition is, it's 3 words, it's really simple, and any kind of more complicated definition is wrong because it's complicated. I agree that is a problem. So there we go. Good agreement.
But there's no real discussion to be had about the appropriateness of the definition being offered. If you look at the Matt Walsh document.
Yeah, that's it. That's the other thing as well. The problem with the trans-affirming definition of woman is not that it's complicated, it's that it's wrong.
And you've lost, you've failed, your side is clearly lost because you offered more than one sentence.
Yeah, I absolutely agree this is a problem. Again, I've already said. The things I would also say, this applies to lots of things. And it's annoying every single time it happens. A good example I always give is that there are many in the kind of atheist Christian debate, the idea of context has almost become like a meme, where it's if a Christian ever says, well, we need to think about this in context. It's become like, oh, well, you're just saying that because you want to avoid the issue, because you want to obfuscate the issue. And the idea that a introduction of context to the reading of a text could possibly actually be about just saying, no, we need to arrive at a correct conclusion, and the correct conclusion can only be reached through context, that's completely ignored. And I think in general, I mean, if you want to talk about theology or philosophy or even politics, there are going to be, for any issue you have, anything you believe, I guarantee there will be some point where someone will ask a question and there is a potential very simple sounding answer that you are going to disagree with, and you're going to have an answer that's more complicated. So you need to realize that if you are the kind of person who, when you have the simple answer, and again, there'll probably be a given situation for any position you're in where you will be the one with the simple answer and the other person will be the one with the complicated answer. You need to, when you're the one with the simple answer and the other person has the complicated sounding answer, not just say, well, word salad, your explanation is complicated, it's confusing, and therefore it's word salad, therefore it's wrong. Because then someone will turn it around on you, right? There are libertarians who will say taxation is theft because theft is when you take something from someone using force, and taxation is backed up by the threat of force from the state, therefore they're taking money from you with the threat of force. That's a very simple thing to say. Right, taxation is like that's a really simple statement, and of course the response to that would be getting into the lots of moral questions around what exactly does it mean for something to be theft, what is the nature of a social construct, when actually can certain things that we might say are immoral actually wrong. For example, for me, I would say, well, the difference is that the only reason people have all of the money that they have to basically enjoy in the first place is because we live in a society, and therefore by enjoying that money you are tacitly accepting your obligation to sustain the society that you live in that lets you have that in the first place. And that's kind of the basic social contract argument, right? Like that unspeakingly, in accepting living in a society and accepting the benefits of living in a society, you can go off into the woods and do your own thing. But by living in a society, you are accepting that you like living in a society, and therefore you're accepting that you will be willing to pay the cost of living in that society, which will be taxes to pay for the police, to, pay for the army, to protect things, stuff like that. Pay for hospitals so people can, not die. That's the basic argument. But of course, that's more complicated. And, people can say, oh, you're confusing things. It's very disingenuous every single time it happens. And yeah, I really don't have any time for it myself. And I would agree, it's a problem that gender critical people do sometimes. And I would say, as far as I'm concerned, don't do that. If any of you are going to listen to me on that point. But it's the thing that everyone does on all sorts of different points.
Peter and Colin are these types of, rationalist type people who love to talk about having the debate, but very rarely actually do it with people that they disagree with. And
I don't know if that's fair. I think Colin, I would imagine he debates quite a few people. So the thing with Boghosian is that in this video, Rationality Rules thought he was going to be debating Peter, but then Peter brought in Colin Wright and basically acted as the moderator, which is a pretty like cowardly move to do in a way, to be like, oh, I'm going to have a debate with you, and then be like, actually, I'm not having a debate with you, I'm going to be the moderator. Like I would be annoyed if if ContraPoints was like, oh, I'm going to have a debate with you, and I was like, okay, I'll go have a debate with ContraPoints, show up to debate, and Contra's like, actually, Judith Butler's going to be, I mean, the thing is, there's not really, honestly, whoever the debate was, it would be fine, because I feel like as long as they were civil, I'd be able to run rings around them. The only thing that they could do is shout and stuff, and I'd be like, okay, well, I can't be bothered with this. But the point is, obviously, to have someone who you initially thought you were going to debate be a moderator, well, that's going to kind of throw off the idea that the moderator's particularly impartial here. That is very stupid to be like, oh, I'm the moderator. By the way, I brought another person to argue my case for me, and I'm going to be moderating the debate between you two. Nah.
Very academic, sterilized discussion about definitions, I think was one way of kind of going through the motions of that disagreement.
I don't know about that, because essentially, like, what I'm saying is that the definition stage is important for any debate, because it's important before you have a discussion to know exactly what you're talking about. And I do think that's important. I don't think there's anything insincere about that. You know, I think sometimes it can be unhelpful if it's basically stopping things dead because you're either having like such a complicated discussion about the definitions. Like, so I think sometimes it can get ridiculous, but I also think, for example, like a good example would be this, right? If you're going to have a debate, and the debate is socialism good for the UK or good for the world? You're obviously going to want to define what you both mean by socialism, like early on. And you might not agree on the definition early on, which I think, but it's worth knowing exactly what the other person is saying it means, right? Because otherwise you might be talking past each other. So like that's the obvious benefit, and I don't think that's necessarily insincere.
Is going to talk about the correct definition, you know, in these kind of essentialist, prescriptivist terms. However, I think to deny...
I think I'm going to pause here. Just to say, my focus here was not that they hadn't arrived at the correct definition. My focus was that, because if anything, I think trying to arrive at the correct definition before the debate actually hampered the debate. Like in the preliminary stage of the debate, being like, okay, now let's make sure we've all decided what the correct definition is. I don't think that. I think that actually, first of all, it is possible that sometimes there can be variant definitions that are potentially both valid. I don't know if I'd fully agree with that, but I certainly think that a lot of the time in a debate, if you hear someone else's definition and you disagree with it, it can be productive just to move past that, rather than saying, well, before we even begin the debate, let's make sure we agree on the definition. But obviously, so the context there, as I said, you know, before they entered the debate, because the name of the debate, the title of the debate was, is gender a social construct? And I said, well, obviously, if they were going to start the debate, they should have started by defining gender and social construct. And I guess he's pausing now to say, well, you know, for King Critical, it might have been important because he thinks they should have arrived at the correct definition of gender and social construct, but not necessarily. You know, if they'd disagreed on the definition of gender and social construct, then if it was possible to still have the debate, just understanding they're talking about different things, and, you know, maybe you know, Colin could engage with Stephen, but be like, well, you know, obviously I'll use your word or your definition of a social contract, even though I don't quite agree with it. Like that would have been productive. But the point is, what would be very unproductive is for them to have this massive debate about, is gender a social construct, when they have not, they potentially have literally no idea what either side means in using those words, gender and social construct. So that's what I was saying. Not that they have to arrive at a completely agreed upon definition beforehand that's like the correct definition, just that they should at least have some idea of what the other side means.
Strange to me that goes on here, which is to say, well, you've clearly not understood the term gender because it doesn't apply to the terms man, woman, male, female, right? And
I wouldn't say that. I would say for me it doesn't apply to those terms. If someone else, I wouldn't say someone's misunderstood it. If they said it did, I'd just say I don't think that lines up with reality.
In my view, just wrong. Like you could say, you know, if you say, oh, what gender was she? She was a woman. Like if that dialogue happened, I wouldn't go, whoa, what are these people doing? They've used words in the wrong way.
I will say this, like the thing about the gender thing, and this is something that I've actually changed my mind on since I started this channel. It's annoying because nowadays people do use the word gender and conflate it with man or woman. And in a way, like that's kind of valid. The issue is, I think, certainly as far as this discussion is concerned, it's generally not productive to use the word gender that way. With the word gender, there is a lot of equivocation where people will say things like, well, your gender can change. And then they'll give examples of gender roles, and then they'll be like, therefore, because whether you're a man or woman is gender, that means that you're agreeing that whether you're a man or woman could change. Whereas what I would say is that whatever we're saying gender is, whether we're saying gender is the same thing as gender roles, or gender is the same thing as whether you're a man or woman, we have to pick one and stick with that. Because otherwise the discussion is going to become very unproductive, because there will be this equivocation where you know, I might agree that gender can change, thinking we're talking about gender roles, but then somebody else, thinking that the term gender means are you a man or woman, will say, so you agree gender can change, therefore you can agree someone can change from being a man to a woman. So that's an example of where arriving at the correct definition of gender is not as important, because honestly, like if there was, like if we got together and just somehow there was like a broad agreement that we should use the word gender one way or the other, I really wouldn't mind. I'd say there, the more important thing is just making sure we actually agree on what the term means for the sake of the discussion. And then within the context of that discussion, don't constantly flip-flop on what it means. If we're going to say it means man or woman, okay, let's not use the word gender to describe gender roles, because that's just going to create confusion. If we're going to agree that what we're really talking about when we talk about gender is masculinity, femininity, gender roles, then let's not use it to mean man or woman. That's what I would say.
Oh yeah, the toys were gendered. There were Barbie toys for the girls and action men for the boys. I wouldn't be like, what, that sentence is nonsense. That the word gendered is being used, like that is a correct application.
Well, there I would just say that like my interpretation of someone saying that would be that they are arguing that gendered means for boys and for girls, which is kind of accurate, even if you're going by the gender, because gender roles are for boys and for girls. But I would just argue that is a social norm that's not necessarily valid.
Of the word gendered and how it's used by ordinary English speakers. Obviously, for like a full survey, I'd have to gather a ton more data and kind of analyze the way that these words are being used.
I'm looking at this, like, this is not called part 1, part 2, anything like that, but there is no way, surely, he's only 4 minutes into my video, he's 24 minutes into my video, which means that he's basically responding at a rate of, for every 1 minute of my content, it takes 6 minutes of his content. So considering my video is an hour, like, based on that rate, it should take him like 6 hours to respond. Oh, hello. My camera ran out of recording space. Talking about running out of space. Okay, we're almost like, I don't know.
But I think that...
Like, I would love to be able to do these 2 hours in 4 parts. In 3 parts, and like basically manage to get through another 15 minutes, but we really don't have like very long.
Concept of gender that isn't associated to these kind of categories as well, I think is...
It's definitely associated.
I do really object to the framing of like requiring a definition or whatever. I think what you want is some kind of specification of content, right? And
I think we don't disagree on this. Like, I think basically he's, whatever, all power to him. But I think he is nitpicking where there is no real disagreement here. I'm not saying, again, just to reiterate, I'm not saying that there needs to be one definition, like kind of simple definition that's completely agreed on by both people. I'm happy. So I think what he's saying with specification of content there is basically saying just make it clear what you mean in saying this thing. And I'm like, yeah, like that's the point. Like, essentially, it doesn't matter if someone gives a perfect dictionary ready definition, just to like, well, here's kind of roughly what I mean, give some examples, things like that. Just reach a point where both sides can be like, okay, I understand what you mean in saying this. And also so the audience can, of course, understand what both people mean by saying this, because maybe the audience doesn't understand, and that's going to make it hard for them to follow the debate. But it doesn't seem like we actually disagree on this. Like I say, it seems like he's kind of sort of putting words in my mouth, because his objection seems to be the idea of like a perfect definition that everybody agrees on, which is not what I'm saying is needed at all.
Prescribe from the way that the scientists use that word back to ordinary people and say, well, actually, people have got it wrong. The way that they think that a word like man works is wrong, because we've now discovered chromosomes. And so...
Okay, so here he's basically saying like that we could arrive at an instrumentalist definition for a word that's correct in an academic context, but then we can't argue that should be used colloquially. I don't really disagree with that. I think, yeah, of course we can have a colloquial definition that's different. I would say, again, if there is a sociological issue with using a term a certain way, I think we could aspire to have people use terms more accurately. And I do think there are examples where people using words certain ways that, kind of create issues like that. That's something that people should actually counter. And, for example, the whole Pluto as a planet thing, I think it would have been a problem if people kept using the word planet to include Pluto when science has shown it doesn't really make any sense. I also, on some level, genuinely, I think that that the term non-avian dinosaurs should be popularized. I think there's actually quite a good example, because in that context, of course, what happened is scientists looked and they said, look, there's no way that we can actually say that birds are anything other than dinosaurs. Like, they are literally dinosaurs. So, like, that's simply the reality. Like, to say that they're in some way this separate thing and that dinosaurs existed 65 million years ago, or existed hundreds of millions of years ago, but then died out 65 million years ago, and now we've got birds that are the separate thing. Scientists realized that just didn't make any sense, and that therefore now birds are dinosaurs. Not just birds descended from dinosaurs, birds are literally dinosaurs. They're part of, I guess, the family or the clade or whatever, I don't know what it would be, Dinosauria. So people colloquially, they'll use the word dinosaurs to clearly refer to that group of animals that went extinct 65 million years ago. If you call someone a dinosaur, you're calling them, very old, implying they're from 65 million years ago. Maybe, I don't know, for some reason, I do like to be a bit nerdy and argue that we should actually specifically use the term non-avian dinosaur to distinguish from avian dinosaurs, which are, of course, birds. And sometimes I will be a bit funny about that. In a way, partially because I like to annoy people. There's a lake near where I live that has a model of a Tyrannosaurus Rex by it, like a little Tyrannosaurus Rex sculpture. I don't really know why. I don't think there were any like major kind of fossil paleontology discoveries near where I live, so I'm not sure why they decided to make a sculpture of a T-Rex. But my sister was like, oh, do you know there's a lake with a dinosaur near it? And I was like, well, Ellie, my sister's called Ellie. I was like, well, Ellie, pretty much all lakes have dinosaurs near them. Geese, ducks, wrens, swans. Lots of lakes have dinosaurs in them. Now there is, however, a lake that has a sculpture of a non-avian dinosaur near it. So maybe that's what you're thinking about. And I kind of said it to annoy her. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I personally am on a one-man crusade to normalize the specification of non-avian dinosaurs instead of referring to non-avian dinosaurs as if there aren't such a thing as avian dinosaurs, which is to say birds. All of that is to say, it's entirely up to you. Whether or not you want to take an example of where scientists have arrived at a correct, better definition for something and apply that socially, like colloquially, you can do that if you want. You don't have to. Certainly there are examples where we have done that, and there are examples where we could do that, and I don't think it would be a problem if we did that. Like, if people did start actually saying non-avian dinosaurs every single time, if, they're watching Jurassic Park and it's like, look, it's Jurassic Park, a place where there are non-avian dinosaurs that have been brought to life. They'd be like, well, that's technically more correct, because a park where dinosaurs have been brought to life, that's not impressive. You can go to any bird sanctuary and find hundreds of dinosaurs that are alive. They've been brought to life by their mother. But yeah, you can see. Maybe some people say, oh, that's annoying, but whatever. Really, every single time you got to say non-avian dinosaurs. Well, it's strictly true that that's what they are. They are dinosaurs, but again, you can't use the word dinosaur in such a way as if to exclude species that are alive right now. That's the point I'm making.
To define the meaning of the term in the way that ordinary speakers use it, to also include the way that some specialists might use it in sciences and things like.
So yeah, there he's saying like, oh well, as long as people use this term that way, it's technically correct to say that. Like, basically, it's a correct definition as long as people are using it. I don't necessarily agree. Because I think that there are, for example, moral criticisms you can make of a definition and logical criticisms. And I actually think it's possible you could say people are using a definition in a way that is so morally offensive or intellectually inconsistent that they're using it that way, but they're wrong. I think a good example would be like anything to do with religion. I think that when you actually look at what a religion is, you have to say that religions make pretty important claims about reality. And if someone doesn't affirm those claims, they really aren't that thing. And because the problem is you have to arrive at like, if you simply define words by the way they're used, then you will find yourself reaching a situation where nothing means anything. Because there are going to be many people who call themselves Muslims, but they aren't even aware of, never mind uphold, many of the actual claims about Islam. So if you're going to kind of recognize the colloquial definition, you'd have to say that like there is a valid definition of Islam that is literally just, you don't actually believe any of it, but you have a kind of cultural affinity or association with like maybe like the Arab world or something like that. Because there are many people who then calling themselves Muslims, it's got nothing to do with any actual metaphysical beliefs or theological or philosophical beliefs. It's just that they're from, Pakistan, or they're from Egypt, or they're from Algeria, and therefore for them, like, being Muslim is like part of their heritage, but it doesn't actually mean anything. And in that context, I'd say, no, these are people who are just using the word wrong. And I think, like, that's the only intelligent way to define a word, because otherwise you're just going to arrive at the unhelpful definition, like I say, that these words don't mean anything.
It's not for the creator of the dictionary to sort of say, well, actually, the majority of people here have got it wrong. It's actually for the creator.
Well, again, it depends. So I think there are arguments you can make that there are, like this is obviously a clear key disagreement. I think that there are actually intellectual arguments that could be made for the idea that a certain definition is right or wrong logically. Oh, I think just came up. Right or wrong logically. And that definition or that reasoning can contradict people's usage of the term.
Which was the definition of man that he offers up.
Someone who lives up to a social
I agree.
Oh, by the way, so he's now sped me up. So now I'm listening to myself super fast. We're almost at the end of my allotted recording time, unfortunately, but I'll see what he has to say to this.
I think there were problems. I think that it's basically empathy. Stephen's definition.
that is typically associated with phenotype, aesthetics, and behaviors. Yep, is that right?
Yeah. Okay, so that seems like an agreement there. Basically, my criticism of Stephen's definition is that it doesn't mean anything. He's agreeing with that too, so well done.
Is that Stephen's offering a general theory here of how he thinks that concepts work. So that is that they are, so.
I don't think that it's worth it. I'm going to try and actually, I'm really going to try and push to get to the 40-minute mark, even though we're actually now past the point I wanted to record. And part of that means I'm not going to listen to this, because essentially I think Stephen's definition is wrong. He thinks Stephen's definition is wrong. We both agree it's wrong. I don't think the nuances of why we believe it's wrong particularly matter.
However, as I said on my kind of view, I do tend to think that a lot of these sort of more academic discussions are actually secondary to first.
Okay, yeah, so basically, just to rush through this, I said, so basically there was a moment where in the debate, rationality rules got Colin Wright to admit that it's possible for somebody to be an intelligent, rational person and still affirm trans identity. And I said that I thought it would have been, appropriate, therefore, for rationality rules to concede it's possible for somebody to disagree with trans identity and not be an evil bigot. And what he's basically saying is, well, sure, but I think that a lot of the time the disagreement with trans identity extends from a bigotry, and of course we've already kind of addressed that, and I already said, well, no, for me that's for me at least certainly that's not true. My disagreement with all the kind of intellectual justification for that comes first, and the there is no bigotry in my case, but even any kind of aversion to the idea of trans identity that extends from that is in fact extending from the arguments rather than the inverse.
Academic type discussions on one side of the issue are in fact transphobic.
I don't know about that at all, because I think when you think about like the main people talking about this stuff, I don't think they like the people who seem to be transphobic seem to not really be having these academic discussions. And to be fair, it's a bit difficult to say because there aren't that many people I'd say are really having full-on academic breakdowns of this. I mean, it's me, Helen Joyce, Kathleen Stock, Rubble of Empires, Peak Trans. But I would say, I'd be comfortable saying none of those people give to me the impression of being like transphobic. I don't think that Helen Joyce or Kathleen Stock, these kind of liberal academic types, appear to have any issue with trans identity in any way that could be considered bigoted.
Whether the classification schema that we use is non-negotiable and inevitable, or whether it is negotiable, right? And
no, not necessarily, because I think that the language stream we use, it could be negotiable, but, well, I suppose it depends what it means by negotiable, because what I would say is really it's more about objectivity versus subjectivity, because I would say we could negotiate the definition, but there's still almost certainly going to be a correct definition, whereas this guy seems to think that it's usually not reasonable to talk about there being such a thing as a correct definition. That seems to be a disagreement. I'm perfectly happy to negotiate the definition. This is a common thing you see from trans activists. They'll act as if the gender critical position is literally that we think language can't change or can't be interrogated or can't be, complicated. we think it can be. We just think that the result of that interrogation and complication will fall down on the side of trans identity still being invalid.
Legally and socially, we can modify the way that we consider women, such that we include a class of people.
See, I absolutely agree. We can change these terms, but I disagree that it is just obviously completely acceptable to change these terms pretty much entirely to the end of like achieving some kind of social good. Like, I don't think that's a good way to deal with things, because like in general, I think that's a wrong attitude to have, that we should change the way we perceive reality. And of course, by changing language, you are changing the way we perceive reality in order to achieve, like I say, some kind of moral good, because then you're suggesting that morality determines reality, and I don't like that. Okay, so we've hit 40 minutes. Oh, yeah, exactly. I was going to say 40 seconds. No. Yeah, we've hit 40 minutes. Bang on. And I did slightly go beyond the time I would usually record. So, you're welcome. The thing is, I realized that obviously we might not be able to do this in 3 parts anyway, because obviously I have to then hit 40 minutes for the next 2 parts as well. And the thing I'm thinking is, of course, this whole time I was wondering, how is he going to get through my video? And I believe I mentioned that he has actually started to speed me up. And the problem with that is I was thinking, we'll be able to get through 40 minutes, or we'll be able to get through this video in 3 parts, because an hour of this video is just going to be him watching me. However, if he is instead speeding through and skipping some of what I'm saying, then that doesn't work, because obviously that means that considerably, well, at least some amount less than an hour of the video will be watching me. And I don't think, absent that possibility of, a lot of the video just being him watching me, which of course I don't need to respond to, I think it's unrealistic that I'll be able to respond to 40 minutes of content in 1 hour. I mean, if you look, for example, he's only responded to 11 minutes of my content in 40 minutes. So, like, he wouldn't even, like, usually my goal is 20 minutes in an hour. He wouldn't even be reaching that, and that doesn't get us even to halfway towards responding to 40 minutes an hour. So, I don't know, this will probably end up being 4 parts, but at least we managed to put a big dent in it here. Alright, everyone, I hope you enjoyed. I will pretty much just rush away, because, yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this already. Usually I allot slightly less time than this to recording. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next week. Bye!